Makerspaces, design thinking meets curriculum. Like they say on the airlines, if you're in the wrong plane, time to get out. Otherwise, we're going to talk about Makerspaces for the next half hour, 45 minutes or so. My name is Richard Thomas. I'm a Vice President with SHP Leading Design. Joining me today, I have a very esteemed panel joining me. It's Dr. Susan Hayward from Washington Local Schools in Toledo, Jeff Parker, an associate with SHP Leading Design, and last but certainly not least, Mr. Tom Brennan, President of School Outfitters. And today we're going to talk a little bit about this notion of makerspace and design thinking and how that meets with curriculum, and give you an example of how that might play out. But first, I want to establish a little bit of context. This helps me understand a little bit about how this whole thing is coming to play in our lives, and hopefully it'll help you as well. We want to talk about why this is a big deal. We want to talk about how it's being integrated into curriculum. We want to understand a little bit about some of the impacts that some things like furnishings and other elements are impacting the classroom environment. We certainly want to spend a moment to understand what design thinking is all about and how that works in this equation, and then we'll talk just a tad about the future. So let's first address this issue of why making. Why is this such a big deal? Why is this so important as we go forward? So this is an incredibly brief history that I'll go through with you. We started with the Industrial Revolution, we moved to the Computer Revolution, now we're in the Internet. History lesson done. So that's brief. But where we are today is actually not just at the Internet. We're at this notion of the cusp of the Internet of Things. And that's an interesting place to be because it begins to engage, in my mind, and integrate this concept of maker ideas, design thinking, and so forth. I know a guy named Mark Hatch. He's the former CEO of Tech Shop and also the author of a book called the Maker Manifesto. And Mark would tell you that as important as the internet and as important as computers are in their life, we can't live in them, we can't eat them, we can't sleep in them. The importance of computers and the internet is somewhat changing as we look at this notion of the Internet of Things coming online, because sooner than later, we're going to have this relationship with things that we cherish. Internet of Things is about the tools that we use becoming a little bit more friendly with us, and themselves developing this sort of network outside of just our communication with them. There's not our talking to everybody else. Those things become very important elements in our life. And as we look at that, to me, that provides fodder, maybe even a foundation for this discussion about the importance of maker activities, because those are the things that we'll be relating to in a much different way over time. I had the pleasure of attending a presentation from a fellow named Jamie Castle. Jamie is one of the 10 people who started Google. And he spoke of his understanding of our current education environment. His title is Chief Education Evangelist. I thought it was a great title. Jamie's perspective on our traditional education system is that we shouldn't demean it, right? It's been a significant part of our lives. In fact, it's the reason we're all here, the success of our traditional education model. So he actually holds it in high esteem. And sometimes we sort of beat up on our old education system. But frankly, he also goes on to say that as important and as profound as it was, it's no longer capable of supporting the educational needs as we go into the future. It's simply been tapped out. A new paradigm needs to be put in place. And one of the reasons he thinks that, and spoke of it in very telling terms, was this quote. This quote, he says, he held up his cell phone, which is a brand new cell phone at the time of this conversation. He said, I looked at the cell phone in the hands of my 5-year-old son. He said, and it occurred to me at that moment in time that this is the dumbest piece of technology that child will ever encounter in its life. I recognize the significance of that. That technology is well beyond what it took for us to get to the moon, and it represents the stupidest piece of information that this kid will ever hold. To me, that's kind of a stunning realization about what's to come and how are we going to address what's to come. So I thought it was a very interesting point of view on the future. Relative to the future, I shouldn't speak for all of us, but I certainly came out of an era where the paradigm or the philosophy of education centered around this notion of objectivism. And I'm going to have to read this because I want to make sure I get this right. objectivist theory places a strong emphasis on mastery of specific learning objectives. No surprise there. In the classroom, objectives are first classified. Proper activities are selected, organized, presented in the best possible manner, and finally learning is evaluated. There is a strong alignment between objectives, learning activities, and the evaluation component. Students are tested frequently, and rigorous standards are set to ensure capability. Sounds pretty familiar, perhaps for a few of you. Certainly the way I was educated. We're moving away from that. Arguably, that whole paradigm is changing to one of what we call constructionism or constructivism. Constructionism is at the heart, the idea of constructivism is that problem solving is at the heart of learning, thinking, and development. As people solve problems, they discover consequences of their actions. They construct their own understanding. In essence, the learner, by doing that, is required to change. It espouses that people only really understand by virtue of making things. So constructionism is a powerful alignment with this concept of making, this concept of the maker movement. It capitalizes on what we understand to be sort of an innate, personal, human characteristic that centers around the idea of learning. To me, that all sounds a little bit heady, and the best analogy I've heard so far between the difference between the way we have been learning and the way we are proposing we must learn is this little anecdote from Mark Hatch. He says, while it may be faster to memorize facts before one experiences them, ownership of a fact is fleeting, perhaps even non-existent. The concept is this: hot is a very difficult concept to understand until you've been burned. That struck me as probably the simplest, most elegant example of the nature of the difference between objectivist learning and constructionism, which I believe is the heart of the maker movement and the heart of design thinking. We've seen significant growth throughout this conversation in the whole discussion about design thinking, and soon Dr. Hayward and Jeff will give you a demonstration of a project that we completed up in the Beaver Creek School District that highlights how this is being implemented in the curriculum. Before we do that, however, I want to get on the same page with two definitions. When we talk about maker movement, we talk about this. The maker movement is about moving from consumption to creation, turning knowledge into action. I believe the maker space, the maker idea, is the ether that all education will aspire to come from as we go forward. Now we want to talk about design thinking. What does that mean? Well, there's a couple of diagrams we'll use today. This is my favorite diagram about design thinking because as a designer, it captures the essence of what design process is all about, which is messy as hell at the beginning of the deal, ultimately working towards a solution at the end. The definition is the same for both diagrams I'll show you, and it reads, design thinking is an iterative approach to problem solving that intentionally seeks out people with different perspectives, knowledge, skills, and experience, and has them work together to create a practical solution for a real-world problem. I love that definition, and I love that graphic solution for it. For those who like things that are a little bit more tangible, we talk about design thinking consisting of 5 basic parts. One is centered around empathy, understanding the user, a definition of the problem, an opportunity to ideate and create different solutions, an opportunity to prototype those solutions, and ultimately a way to test them so that revision can be made and the solution can be better as we go forward. So at this point, I think it's appropriate to listen to how Dr. Hayward and Jeff came up with a solution for the Beaver Creek School District. Dr. Hayward?
Good afternoon. Beaver Creek was in the middle of preparing for writing straight A grants. And in Ohio, how many of you are from Ohio? So in Ohio, the State Department came in and said that we are going to do this amazing thing and give school districts the opportunity to apply for grants based on creative and innovative ideas. So Jeff was the architect in Beaver Creek when I was there, and he was doing a lot of building for several years. So I reached out to Jeff one day and I said, could you come over to our high school? I would really like to look at the high school and the library and do something to really increase engagement, motivation, and kids working in a collaborative space and really focusing on like an academic research library in a high school. And so we were sitting there just looking at the space, and Jeff said to me at that time, have you ever, I said to him, what are some creative and innovative things you're seeing in school districts as you are working in them? And he said, have you ever heard of design thinking? And so I went home that weekend, it was on a Friday, and I reached out to one of my curriculum supervisors, and we both went home that weekend and we researched everything there was on design thinking. And we really looked at Stanford's model, and we bought every book, and we began the process of saying this is such a good thing for kids. And so we wrote this grant in about 3 days, and we ended up receiving that grant, and it was for about $1 million. And so why design thinking? Why really should we afford our students to do this? So that was our impetus. And so Beaver Creek is a high wealth, high achieving district in the state of Ohio. Strong students. And so what could we give our kids that define creativeness, innovativeness, but also increased student achievement? So design thinking really met that challenge because we really wanted to prepare our kids for 21st century skills. We wanted them to be critical thinkers. We wanted them to collaborate. We wanted them to be creative. We wanted them to be problem solvers. We wanted them to be sensitive to people. We wanted them to think deeply. That's what we wanted to give our kids. And so we began the process of really thinking about what is that curriculum going to look like? What teachers will be teaching it? What are we going to provide our students so that they are ready for college and career readiness, so that they're ready to go out into that workforce and really be able to work as a team, to work together. And the design thinking model really afforded our students that. So in that grant, we wrote that grant for grades 8 through 12. We put a design thinking lab in both middle schools and 2 at the high school. And then last year, we made the decision to move that curriculum down to grades 6 and 7. And I'm no longer in Beaver Creek, and so they're rolling that out this year, and I'm sure that is highly successful. So the design thinking model really helped us imagine new possibilities for learning that would change the lives of children and the lives of teachers by powerfully confronting those 21st century skills. So our goals were really to focus on that human-centered process of identifying problems globally, in our state, in our community, and in our district. And really give our kids the opportunity to be challenged, work together, and go through that design thinking process. And we gave them the freedom to fail. We gave them a multitude of resources. When Jeff presents to you and really shows you those spaces that we designed and the amount of work that went into really thinking about that 21st century skill and providing those kids those many opportunities. So essentially, design thinking is a confidence that new, better things are possible, that students can do, that they can make happen and see a final product. And we were able to provide that to our students. The next slide is talking about the impact. So what was the impact on our students? We saw a significant impact. It was huge. We saw students fully engaged. We saw students motivated. We saw students collaboratively working together with kids they don't typically interact with in their classrooms. And they're on the ground, they're working together, they're using power tools, they're using all these different types of consumables, and they're really thinking through that process of solving a problem, creating a prototype, refining that prototype, and going back and forth through that process of creating a final product. And at the end of that, they're presenting that final product to their classmates. Classmates are providing them that feedback. They're going back and they're continuing to refine, make that product better and better, and to have a product that can be used in the school, in the community, in the nation, or anywhere else in the universe. So innovation begins with finding an opportunity within a landscape full of challenges, and that's what we wanted our kids to do. We wanted to instill in them the thinking necessary to problem solve for the rest of their life in the real world, and that was our number one goal. Our kids were successful in taking state tests. They were successful with the state curriculum. They were very successful. We had to take it to another level and really look at the ways they were learning, the kinesthetic, the listening to others, to truly listen and support others in the process of creation. And so that was really the impetus of what we wanted. And of course, bringing these kids in and having them experience that, you never know how they're going to respond. And in my 30 years of education, it truly was the most excited I've ever seen students. You see kids in science labs when they're doing labs. You see students doing project-based learning and doing activities. But this was a whole new level of learning for them. It was long-term thinking and long-term learning. The impact of design thinking on the broader curriculum. So when we started this process of writing that grant, we really wanted to focus on science and social studies. And so one thing that we did was, as soon as we received our grant, provide that professional development, we focused on teachers in grades 8 through 12 that were licensed in science and social studies. And then when it came time to post those positions, we focused on social studies. We wanted those social studies teachers to be our teachers because they have great empathy. They're really teaching about the history of our world. And we wanted them to be able to take that thinking into that design thinking classroom where kids are solving real problems and creating those prototypes. And again, we moved that down to grade 6 to afford additional students the opportunity to experience this. And we created a curriculum that was layered. So it was like Design Thinking 101, and then they could take 201, and then they could take 301, and then they could do internships. And so we really took that curriculum to a higher and higher and higher level for those students taking those courses. The design thinking involves believing that students can make a difference and having an intentional process in order to get to new relevant solutions to create positive impacts on our community and beyond. And that's the essence of that creation, and giving those kids that space and those multiple layers of space, which we will share in a few minutes, and giving them the time and the resources to think deeply through that design process. With design thinking, students solve real problems, think for themselves, discover knowledge, and continually revise and change their models and prototypes. Design thinking requires creative workspaces where students can research information, work collaboratively, and create and test prototype solutions to problems. By rethinking the design of our learning spaces, we set new messages to our students about how they should feel and interact within the confines of the school and the classroom. So we expanded those learning opportunities through that design space.
Done?
Yep.
Great. Thank you, Susan. Dr. Hayward, thank you. I'll check the time. We're doing good. I'm Jeff. It's great to have you all here. Thanks so much for coming. So, as Dr. Hayward described, she'd done all the legwork and all the brain work, frankly, to put this curriculum together. And I remember I got a text. It was a Saturday morning. I was sitting at a girls' 8th grade basketball game watching my daughter play, and I get a text message. We got it. So we were all very excited and ready to go. So we had to find a place. We wanted this. She mentioned a $1 million grant. With that grant, just to be clear, we built 4 Makerspaces in 4 different buildings. That grant also included all the tools and equipment in the rooms and all the professional development. So it wasn't $1 million in one room, just to be clear. But we wanted this to be in a location that was central to everyone at the high school. So we picked a spot right across the hall from the library, from the media center. It was an underutilized former TV production lab that had been turned into a study hall, essentially. So, you know, a lot of nice space, but really just nothing happened there. So that's where we were going to land. There are kind of 3 activity components, I guess I'll call them, that support design thinking. The first one is collaboration, and it looks like this. You're working in a group, you're putting ideas up on some vertical surface, and you're brainstorming, you're doing SWOT analysis on things. But that requires a lot of vertical surface, and for that reason, it made sense that we would arrange those opportunities around the perimeter of the room, which makes perfect sense, right? So you line the thing with marker boards, and kids can write stuff on it. The downside to that is that what happens when the bell rings? Right? I've got to go to the next class, and I have to either rub off all my great ideas, or who knows what happens, or I leave them there for the next group. And perhaps one of the simplest solutions we came up with, but was maybe the most transformative to what we did there, was this little thing. This, we came to call it a shortboard, and this is just, this is shower board. It's that white melamine board you buy at Lowe's, right? This is like $13.88 a sheet. So we did a study, a design thinking study, of, you know, if this is the right answer. And I think Susan even did some research on like those large Post-it pads that you buy. They're like 30 sheets, and they're, what, 30 bucks? It's like $1 a sheet of paper, right? So we did an analysis on that, and then we actually made one of these. These come in 4x8 sheets. We thought, well, if we cut it in half, it would be perfect. That was my thought, right? But I'm bigger than your average bear. So Susan said, well, that's not perfect. So we made another one that was this size, and you can see we got 3 of these shortboards out of one 4x8 sheet, right? So drill some holes, put some posts on the wall, and it looks like this. So the beauty of it, and I'll lay this down so you can see. The beauty of this is that students can come to class, get their boards out, you know, use it as an archive of where their process has been to date, and continue the work as to where they want to go in the future. And when the bell rings, they just hang them up, right? So it's simple. The nice thing about these is that, you know, they're not perfect. They, you know, you can see the ghosting that occurs on this, right? It's not an ideal solution, but these are nearly disposable. So they'll get dropped and kicked and bent and chipped, and when they wear out, you have the shop teacher make a new batch, right? It's just that easy. The next piece is prototyping. So prototyping is not making something like I made in shop class. We made a candlestick holder that you hung on the wall, the candle sconce, I guess, right? And that was all about finish and the way it looked. Prototyping is not about fit and finish. It's about slamming an idea together, beginning to visualize the realities of that. So it made sense to us, since we had occupied all the perimeter with collaborative space, that the prototyping would have to be in the middle. All this is going in one room, all these different things. And then finally, the last piece is presenting. So students will develop an idea, and at different intervals through the process, they are presenting that idea and soliciting feedback to either classmates, maybe sometimes to expert witnesses who will who can speak more to the real logistics of putting that idea into action. So we wanted to put that space, again, it had to go in the middle. So we had kind of this prototyping zone and this presenting zone. They're right back to each other. And with the collaborative space all around the middle, we didn't have any place to put all the fun stuff like that power tools and the PVC fittings and the duct tape, right, and the dry erase markers. So we created, and you'll see, we created a screen that you can fit and hang all your stuff on. So you can hang shortboards on it, you can hang all the hand tools on it, you can hang buckets of screws and bolts and cotton balls on it. But it has a degree of transparency so that as the instructor is working this room, he or she knows and can hear and can see vaguely what's going on the other side. And so it affords, we work a lot with teachers and they're always anxious about the kid they can't see, the kid that's in the corner, right? So we work to address that problem. This is a little time-lapse video of the D-Lab in action, and I'll try to talk you through it. So this is 3 consecutive class periods, 3 different classes coming and going. Here they are, this is that screen component I described to you. Here they're actually interviewing people about, they're experts about their solutions, about their ideas. So, did I go away? Can you still hear me?
No.
Okay, sorry. So one idea was, what if we did a virtual hall pass, right? They learned that they print reams of hall passes every year. So what if we did a virtual? So they brought the tech guy in from the district. And here you can see them, they're actually, this is on the prototyping side, but they're writing on the shortboards on the walls. They're brainstorming out those ideas. So the whole room is being activated. Here they're actually building things. Here they're building receptacles for recycling. And they wanted to incentivize recycling. So one of the groups had developed a scheme to somehow develop a smart recycling so that when you dropped your used water bottle in it, it would credit your lunch account with so many points, right? So you could get an extra ho-ho. Do they even make ho-hos anymore?
Yeah.
That was my favorite. So that's kind of what design thinking looks like at Beaver Creek. Oh, 2 comments. I was asking the kids as I was sitting there kind of observing all this. So what do you think about this stuff? What do you think about this design thinking stuff? And one of the young men said, you know what, this has really helped me in my other classes because I'm much more comfortable presenting stuff, sharing ideas in other classes. And then I asked a young lady and she said, you know what, I'm using parts of my brain in this class that I didn't know I had, right? So just the opportunity that we're affording us with these sorts of spaces. Whoops.
Jeff, you want to talk a little bit about our own internal
Yes, I forgot.
workings of Makerspaces?
This is the Makerspace at our office. There are a couple things I really love about this. You can see here, there's this big, thick reference manual, and it's being used primarily for its mats, so that we can keep these pieces glued together, right? And the other key thing to point out is that Band-Aids are never too far away.
So that's one solution that we see in this concept of developing maker environments that support a design thinking paradigm. We've got a couple of other very quick examples. We'll go through this. We've done some work for the Deer Park school system and developed an area of their high school that centers around a very functional, multi-use, multi-configurable kind of central collaboration space where problems are identified and dispensed with, and the kids are sent off to go and look at different opportunities and different ways to solve those problems. They have spaces around the outside that create opportunities for interaction with business, people who come in from the outside with other students and other collaborative participants. They have a makerspace space, and they have a technology space. And this has been very well received. It's been open for about a year. Carrie, is that about right? About a year, and we're getting rave reviews about the space and how it's helping students, much the way Susan described helping them rethink and think differently about the work that they're involved with at a curriculum level. Seven Hills School, another client of SHP's, has taken this concept and introduced it to very young children. As far as I know, they're the first ones to do this, at least in this region. And so we developed a makerspace for them, which was literally just completed about a year ago, about a month ago, that gives second graders an opportunity to begin to explore what this notion of making is all about under the guidance of a teacher. And it's actually second, third, and fourth grade that are beginning to work with this. These are some early concept diagrams that we employed, and this is the space right before Final Punch, before we had occupancy in August 12th, I think, of this year. So the important thing to note here is that it's being pushed down to the very youngest students in the curriculum. We think that's really an interesting sort of shift in the perspective on education going forward in some of our communities. All of the spaces that, I'm going to go back to this for 1 second, all of the spaces that we've seen in many of the presentations you've seen throughout this conference show classrooms that are very different from what I grew up with, which is the whole bells and cells, rows and so forth and so on. And I think it's important to recognize that the industry, the furniture industry, is beginning to acknowledge the significance of design thinking and of maker activities. Tom Brennan is going to speak a little bit to what he's seeing in the marketplace, how this is shaping those things that go into our classroom environments. Tom, take it away.
Thank you, Dick. So yeah, the industry, just like we had a standardized model in education, our industry became standardized as well. So, can you hear me all right? Great. So, our industry is waking up from a period of mass production into this kind of new thinking, design thinking for an industry where we're thinking about new ways to work together. You used to come into this show and dealers wouldn't talk to manufacturers they didn't represent, and other dealers wouldn't talk to other dealers. Architects wouldn't talk to certain people, and that's all changing, which is great. I mean, it's really a fun time to be in this industry because it's so new. We're in this early adoption phase, and I look at this what Jeff put together here, and I go, hey, maybe Jeff, maybe we can put that into production together and figure out how to market that, because that's an iterative design that probably another school needs. So we're still early in this, and I think our industry is waking up to this. But I guess I wanted to give you guys permission to engage in design thinking yourself when you think about this process. And first off, just some practical thoughts. So Makerspace is itself a design project, right? So your intention, being mindful of planning and understanding what you want to get out of it, is the prime consideration. But like any design project, as Dick pointed out, the first iteration is rarely that end state. So you got to give yourselves some room to fail, so to speak. Room to say it's okay if this next thing we do is not the best thing or the final thing. We're so used to that, kind of structured environment that we come from that it's hard to break out of that sometimes. But if you can plan flexibly around those intentions, then you can kind of iterate as your product's pedagogy and curriculum shift. You can change these things. You can say what's working and what's not working, and you can, gauge the impact on the kids. So, so there's a lot going on. So when I came to this, I said I want to give you at least some understanding of what's going on in the market out there. And the answer is, it's still in the early stages. So you've got a lot of practical considerations that people are starting to address on this show floor. One is, of course, the right tools for the job. You got to have those, but there are so many tools: 3D printers, CNC routers, sewing machines. Those can be Makerspaces tools. And you also have to have comfortable work areas with plenty of space. You saw that the old desks don't work. These kids need to stretch out. They need to move around. They need to be able to reconfigure their space. They need to have agency over what they do in that room. I saw a speaker once talk about some of the great invention labs, like Thomas Edison's lab, and some of the characteristics of those labs where they had wide hallways. And she said it was a place where happy accidents occurred, where two people could run into each other and figure out, see what they were each doing, and iterate a new design or a new idea from that chance encounter. So I think that's important too, because it is an presentation and brainstorming tools, like Jeff said, and the big thing that we're working on too is storage. I mean, there's a lot of storage is required for projects like this. If you had your own workshop in the basement, you just leave things where you left them, right? The project's half finished, it's on the table, it's all spread out. In schools, they have to move between different periods. You have to be able to get those projects out onto the table, work on them, and put them back quickly. That time is valuable, so that's a big deal. Another one is part storage. If you've got a lot of, you're engaging in the kids' creative juices, you want them to be able to see things and think, how could that work in my solution? So displaying stuff that they can work with, their tools and their materials is important. So here's just a couple things you might want to look out on the floor. You've got some more traditional things like from Tensco and Han, butcher block tables that remind you of shop, but these can be great Makerspace tools to think about. Fleetwood has a great adjustable height table. They're also on the floor. Verco has a new Makerspace table with a flip adjustable top that comes out and can be replaced. So that work surfaces are important. So I would also encourage you guys to give feedback to these manufacturers and talk to them and say, hey, that's not what I need something else. Moreco has just come out with some neat products that have the storage component integrated in these mobile carriers that fit under tables. Smith Systems has their Cascade line. That's great for storage. You can see Shane has some part storage, and if you open that up and you had baubles or buttons or screws in every little box there, kids would be like, oh, this is fun. I think it's a great time to be a kid. Ironwood's got a similar thing. Copernicus and Marvel have some of the tools like the 3D printing. They have some specialized equipment for those that you can cart around. Not every school can afford a dedicated maker space, so you can kind of move it around like we use laptop storage carts. We're starting to see a lot of manufacturers partner with robotics and other equipment makers to kind of design specialty equipment that can fit those things. VEX is a very popular robotics program that kids can use. And then there's a lot of display and presentation tools like we talked about. Janet has a new one, Furniture has a new one. But the whole idea is we're still early in this. There's a lot going on. It's kind of fun. Help us, help you, and talk to us about it. And I want to leave you with one thing. This is our Makerspace. So we have a CNC router, 3D printer, laser cutters. We iterate product every day in school hours. We have designers that do that. It cuts the design time by about 80%. And I'll tell you, the point is the exact same thing is happening in the workplace that's happening in schools, right? So this is really no different. We're all dealing with this Internet of Things, and it's happening right beside almost every business you come to.
Tom, there are no Band-Aids, though.
No Band-Aids. We have them in the kitchen. Yeah.
So
why not now?
I had the opportunity to go to the Global Maker Faire. It was in Queens, New York, about a month ago. And that is the only reason I'm presenting in a t-shirt. But I thought I'd take advantage of the opportunity. But not only did I see a lot of amazing stuff that people were making with their hands, but I heard from teacher after teacher, educator after educator who said, I don't have a $1 million grant, or I don't have a capital fund set aside where I can do this, but I know it's the best thing for my kids. So I commandeer a spare janitor's cart, and I load it up with 5-gallon buckets of cotton balls and PVC fittings and a handful of power tools or hand tools, and I make it work, right? They don't necessarily have to have a room. They just find a way to make it work. $10, $20, $100 at a time. So I think there's tremendous value in just leaping in. But
Perhaps you also want to think about it before you leap too far. And I would point you to a story that you can click on the web, you go to the Parker School in San Diego. You can hear a story, or look at a story that was put together by the assistant head of school, Dr. Lauren Evans, who has begun and is in about the 4th year of what she understands to be a 7-year transition plan, taking the entire school philosophy into a design thinking mentality, which is preschool all the way through 12th grade. It's a great story, and one of her central points is it's different for everybody. You've got to find your own path in order to make this work. So, although we've demonstrated some successful solutions here for you, I can't tell you that that one's going to be replicated for your district or your school program. This is something that we have to work out together. We're here to help to do that, but you're going to have to do a little bit of work on your own as well to make it happen. But just to give you some sense of where this is, Tom mentioned that it's happening in industry. It's also happening at the higher education level. I'm about a week away from attending this particular conference down here, which is the first annual International Symposium on Academic Makerspaces. It's being held at MIT. And it's being put on by the institutions you see just above that logo, which represent some of the most forward-thinking institutions relative to this concept of maker activity at the higher education level. I'm really interested to go to this because the 3 days there essentially are almost a recipe for how they've done it and what they've learned and how we might be able to improve on this concept moving forward. The image on the right is Case Western Reserve's new think box, which is a $35 million renovation, which is part of a larger context of taking the Cleveland region into the realm of being a national, if not international, focal point for maker activities. So it has a significant play, not just in a local education facility, but it's part of a larger context of how we're developing our cities and our communities and our culture going forward. Right here in Cincinnati, we had the manufactory open up in Westchester last year, which is sort of the commercialization of this idea. We have the Proto-Build bar, which you can go and get drunk and build things all at the same time, which really sounds kind of terrifying, but fascinating. Jeff took his daughter there. He didn't get her drunk, so but he did have fun playing. Anyway, the point is that this is happening across the board. This is not a fad, this is real. And I think we want to underscore that as part of one of the messages we're delivering today. So let's conclude, let's wrap up. For the last couple of years, we've talked about 21st century learning, about the elements of that which evolve around the 4 C's of communication, collaboration, creativity, and critical thinking. We've added a 5th, and we've heard this in elsewhere, so we can't take sole credit for this, although I'd like to give credit to Jeff, because he actually talked about it last year. And that 5th is compassion. And what struck us as we looked at this whole conversation about 21st century learning and about how it integrates with this notion of design thinking and makerspaces as kind of the ether for this whole conversation to take place, is that when you look at the alignment of the two, there is probably no more powerful example. Oh no!
There you go.
No more powerful example of why we think design thinking is such a powerful experience going forward relative to the delivery on the promise of 21st century education. We talk about empathy and compassion, communication and definition, ideating collaboration, creativity and prototyping, and critical thinking and testing. When you put these two together, I think that's an incredibly powerful experience. And that's why we believe so strongly in this idea of makerspace and about design thinking as a paradigm shift in how we educate students. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you for coming. Yes, Glenn.
Dr. Hayward, at Beaver Creek, it's high school. It's in the high school.
It's in the 2 middle schools and 2 labs in the high school.
What portion of the student population of those buildings interacts with those labs?
He asked how many students are able to go into the labs. We are running the labs every period, and they're 9-week or semester courses, and so they fill up quickly. It's a high, exciting course that the kids want to take.
Curriculum-wise, is it an elective?
It is an elective, and it's in the middle schools it's a special, and in the high school it's an elective.
Any other
Other
questions?
questions?
Crickets.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.